And now for a look at the boycott movement, which recently suffered some major setbacks in both Canada and Britain. We are joined via Skype by Tal Keinan, that's Chairman and CEO of Clarity Capital, who's in New York. Tal, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Ralph.
Well, Tal, first of all, the British and Canadian governments just passed these anti-boycott resolutions, and the U.S. Congress is legislating a similar law. Could you say that Israel is out of the woods?
Well, look, I think we should welcome these developments. That said, remember that what governments do is one thing. If there is a consumer boycott of Israeli goods, that really kind of becomes unenforceable. So, no, we're not out of the woods.
And Israel's education minister and former economy minister, Naftali Bennett, said BDS is not a real economic threat to Israel. He says that Intel will never leave the country. Are people exaggerating the threat that boycotts pose?
I don't think they are. I mean, so Intel might not leave the country. I think Naftali Bennett is probably right about that. But we don't need Intel to leave the country to have a real economic really catastrophe. I mean, if you kind of think about it, we're about 40% of Israeli GDP is exports, and about a little bit over 30% of that is to Europe. So if you consider that that's about 12% of Israeli GDP is exports to Europe. It would be enough to have, let's say, a 20% interruption of exports to Europe, right? So 20% of 12 would be about 2.4% of GDP. That would put us in recession, and that's not a cyclical recession, of the type that we're accustomed to. That is a secular recession. That's GDP that's not readily replaceable. This is a real threat. When we talk about kind of inequality, distribution of wealth, the fiscal challenges that Israel faces, with our defense budget, our underfunded ministries, education, healthcare, that's a really, really big deal. So I would not dismiss this threat so easily.
And you just said it is a real threat and it's a serious threat. Is there anything that can be done?
Well, I read, a lot of what people say about this sort of being the new anti-Semitism. I don't dismiss that. I'm sure there's a component of that in there, but I think it would be kind of intellectually lazy of us to dismiss the entire movement as as that. I think that there are plenty of people out there who are looking at Israel almost as a pariah state without any real Jewish connection to that feeling. And my sense is our spokespeople, the people that really represent us, either professionally, intentionally, or sort of by default, are often not the best people to be doing that. We don't. Our level of English, our level of kind of understanding of what other cultures perceive us to be is not as high as it could be. And there's some great spokespeople out there as well. That said, we have a message that's kind of difficult to deliver. Sorry, go ahead.
No, Tal Keinan, CEO of Clarity Capital, thank you very much for joining us from New York.
Thank you, Maraf.